Hey horror fans, let's count down the top 20 horror movies of 2023 so far.
Welcome to Talking Horror.
I'm producer Bryan from the Talking Horror podcast, and we're counting down my top 20 horror movies of this year so far. Now, before we get started, just a reminder that these are my opinions. And I haven't seen everything this year. I've only seen 31 of the new horror releases in 2023. I'm still looking forward to things like Malum, Beau is Afraid, Attachment, Huestra, Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, Hunter Kill Her, and a ton more. But what I will say is that 2023 is definitely not as strong as 2022, but there have been some great horror movies so far this year. So let's get into it. But just as a reminder, as I go through these, there might be spoilers. Okay, so we've got two that just missed the list. Consecration and She Came from the Woods. Both have their moments, but not strong enough for my top 20. At number 20, we have M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin. Now, I love M. Night Shyamalan, but this one just really didn't do it for me. It had its moments for sure, but in the end, I just felt like people weren't peopling in this movie. The four intruders didn't change their tactics at all, and that was very hard for me to believe and made the movie pretty repetitive. Dave Bautista was great, but I don't think he was good enough. At number 19, we have 65. Sure, you might think this is more sci-fi, but it still is technically sort of an escape animal attack movie, so I'm counting it. Adam Driver is very good per usual, and in the end, I think the trailer actually ruined the surprises in this movie, which takes it down a notch. It's pretty boring in some places, but in the end, I still had a good time because I love animal attack movies. At number 19, we have Oregon Trail. As some of you may know, I love horror movies set in the Wild West. And quite frankly, this one was pretty good in places. However, I think that Oregon Trail sets the wrong expectations for what this movie actually is. I thought it would be a lot more monster supernatural oriented, and it wasn't. But what I got was pretty enjoyable, very bloody, and a really fun time. In at 17, we have Horror in the High Desert 2, Minerva. This one is so much better than Horror in the High Desert. It's a sequel, but not a direct sequel. It has some pieces that continue on. There was a lot more mystery this time. The documentary aspects were way better as well. They introduced the scary stuff up front and then built again to it throughout the whole movie, and I appreciated that. I actually like the finale of the original one better than this one, but it was still a very good time. Check it out. At 16, we have Sick. This COVID slasher thriller was actually really fun and well done. I really like how it incorporated a lot of the COVID stuff that we all went through. Obvious trigger warnings for this one, but in the end, I think it's a mid-level forgettable slasher. However, that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. At 15, we have Cocaine Bear. I love a good animal attack movie, and this one is campy, fun, silly, really gory in places. I think Elizabeth Banks did an awesome job directing this, and this is a really fun movie. At number 14, we have our first Blumhouse direct-to-digital, Unseen. This is super short and gets straight to the point. I really fell in love with a lot of the characters in this. It has an emotional punch at the end. It's just a really concise, good story about somebody trying to help somebody else over the phone that they've never met. At 13, we have Renfield. I actually have a lot of gripes with this movie, but I just had the best time in movie theaters, highlighted by the performances of Nicholas Hoult and, of course, Nicolas Cage. The double duo of Nicholases definitely makes this worth watching. I think a lot of it is clever, super funny, and silly. I'll remember more about those performances, though, than, like, the plot and actually, like, what happened. So at 13, Renfield. At number 12, we have Russell Crowe in The Pope's Exorcist. Now, I don't necessarily think that this movie is breaking any ground, but it's a really solid exorcism movie, and Russell Crowe and his Italian accent is just absolutely awesome, and he's riding a Vespa in this movie. He rides a Vespa. The last 20 minutes are awesome. The first 5 minutes are great. And if any sequel came from this, I would 100% be in line to see that thing. Plus, I love Alex Esso. At number 11, we have another Blumhouse direct-to-digital that I really liked. There's Something Wrong with the Children. I think this is really well acted, and I think that the premise is really interesting. And what it was going for thematically, in terms of asking the question, like, what if you don't want to have kids? How does society view that? And told through a horror lens was super interesting. I thought the soundtrack was wild. It really brought back the idea of like an 80s movie, and then some of the filming and actual plot points reminded me of a 70s movie. I really, really dug this. And I know that's not the popular opinion, but I really enjoyed it. Okay, it's time for the top 10. At number 10, we have Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool. Now, Brandon Cronenberg's first movie, Possessor, really messed me up. I will never watch that movie again. This one didn't as much, but I can't stop thinking about it. I like what it's asking about violence, where it comes from, how do you fall into it, and then how they tie that into kind of socioeconomics is fascinating. And we'll see how it actually falls into my list at the end of the year, because I really am thinking about it a lot. At number 9, we have The Offering. Now, I had no expectations going into this movie, and I came out really liking it. I think some of the scares are really good. I think the story is interesting, even if it retreads some stuff I've seen in other movies. I think the monster design is spectacular in this. I think most performances are good in this, but in the end, I'm thinking about this one. It was a really fun and enjoyable ride. At number 8, we have The Boogeyman. Yes, The Boogeyman. Again, this is just a solid, fun, one-off horror movie. It doesn't have any connections to anything. You can just sit in your seat and enjoy the hour and a half, 2 hours of this movie. I think some of the scares are really good, and I can brush away kind of the silly, ridiculous stuff in this movie because I just had a really good time overall. At number 7, we have the recent Insidious, The Red Door. I really enjoyed this one, even though I had a ton of gripes. But in the end, I just loved the scares. I like spending time with the Lambert family, and even though the script is very heavy-handed, I think Patrick Wilson did a really good job in his directorial debut. This is far from a perfect movie, and maybe there's recency bias because it's the most recent horror movie I've seen when recording this, but I did have a good time, and I like hanging out with the Lamberts. At number 6, we have Influencer. You might think that Influencer is more of a thriller, but there are horror elements to this, absolutely, and I had a blast. I think I just didn't expect this movie to go the way that it went, and I really appreciated that. I definitely thought I had this movie figured out within the first 5-10 minutes, and boy oh boy was I absolutely wrong. Something that really impressed me with this movie is how social media just wasn't like a hip plot point. It was actually organically integrated into the story and felt like a part of the fabric of this world and narrative. And I really appreciated that. This one's really good. Check it out. Before we get to the top 5, I do want to mention 2 movies that don't necessarily fit into the horror genre per se, but I wanted to give them an honorable mention. The first one is Missing. This spiritual sequel to Searching is excellent. And while it's more like thriller, there are some horrific elements to this movie. Trigger warning for those of you going to see this movie, but it's really great. This would easily be in my top 5 if it counted as horror. The next one is Sisu. Ooh, this movie was so good. There's a lot of blood and gore, which is why I might consider it horror, but it's really just a revenge action movie with amazing effects, spectacular stunts. This movie is awesome, awesome, awesome. This easily would have cracked top 3 if this was more horror. All right, let's get into my top 5 horror movies of 2023 so far. At number 5, we have The Blackening. This horror comedy was so funny and actually has one of my favorite movie theater experiences I've ever had associated with it. It's the O'Reilly Auto Parts part where the entire audience sang along with the movie unexpectedly. It was absolutely amazing. This movie is super funny. It is really thoughtful. And quite frankly, I'm so happy it wasn't just a parody. It was an actual horror comedy that made its own, and it never loses sight of what it's trying to do and what it's trying to say. I had the benefit of never seeing the short, so I got all the jokes for the first time this time. I really, really, really liked this horror comedy. At number 4, we have Brooklyn 45. I loved this movie. This movie is so good because it feels like a black box play that has supernatural elements. It's more about the relationship between the people holding a seance than it is about the supernatural horror elements. And in the end, the horror just comes from the people inside of that room. This one may actually jump up my list at the end of the year. It is so well acted. It's really well put together and directed. I would highly suggest seeing this story about a group of people who held a seance in a post-World War II world, and all of them are veterans in some way. It deals with PTSD. It has a lot of war commentary. Absolutely love it. At number 3, we have Scream 6. I just had a great time. Sure, nostalgia is tied into this, but I really do like the new characters. I thought they used the New York setting really well. It felt lived in as opposed to like bad things happening in Times Square. I really, really enjoyed all of the nostalgia that the movie kept and had for the other movies. I saw this movie twice. This is the only movie on this list that I've seen twice. I really dug this movie. I think it's super fun, and it actually gets me more excited for Scream 7 than Scream 5 did for Scream 6, if that makes sense. At number 2, we have Evil Dead Rise. Now, this movie was very high on my most anticipated 2023 horror movies list, and I had a lot of expectations for it, but it 100% came through. It's gory, it's fun, it's scary, it's engaging, it's just a really good time. I think they balanced the campiness and the humor and the absurdity with the actual grounded scares. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed all of the new ways to mutilate people. I thought this movie was absolutely fantastic. Even if I have a lot of questions about certain relationships, I think that they just really set up being trapped in a high-rise really, really well. The opening title card is spectacular. This movie overall just really did it for me. I was smiling from ear to ear after seeing this one. And of all the movies on this list, I'm the most excited to watch this one again. At number 1, and I know it's going to be an unpopular opinion, but I love this movie. It's Megan. Yes, Mathregan. I really loved Megan. Now listen, is it crazy to have a horror comedy at the top of my list? Maybe, but this movie has its moments of gore, especially if you're watching the unrated version. This movie is crazy funny. I did not expect this movie to actually live up to the trailer. It was so funny. The time I had in the movie theater with this one was absolutely so much fun. This just encapsulated everything I wanted from this movie. Listen, I know it's not pure horror. I know it's not Evil Dead Rise. And realistically, this and Evil Dead Rise are super interchangeable in terms of 1 and 2. But right now, today, Megan, our girl, our idol, our queen, we're getting a sequel from you. I just absolutely dug this movie. I think that this movie does everything that it wanted to do, everything that it should be doing, and the whole time it stuck to its guns, and the unrated version is way better than the theatrical cut, even though the theatrical cut is excellent. So, that's my number 1, and I know you're not going to love it, but I loved it. Thank you so much for joining me to count down these movies. If you want more of this stuff, don't forget, please subscribe to us right here on this channel. You can also find our podcast, Talking Horror with Jamie and Nikisha, wherever you get podcasts. And if you want to follow me on Letterboxd to see my full reviews of everything I see, check me out at BP527. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Horror, and stay tuned for more spooky stuff.